Hey everybody, it's your old pal Wood Doofus here. If you are a woodworker that does any kind of functional work like cabinetry, then breaking down plywood is one of the major things that you are going to be spending your time doing. So having the right tools is important to get that job done efficiently. If you don't have a giant table saw where you can put a whole sheet of plywood through it without any problem, then you're like me and you need other options. So I finally bought the Kreg Rip cut. I hear a lot of bad things about it on YouTube and other sources, but I decided that it's worth the $40 that I spent on it, and I'm gonna give it a try. I made a previous video on using this Bora edge guide to do a long rip cut, and it is definitely worthwhile, but I need an option that can go a little faster when I don't wanna set up this whole thing. So for this video, I'm going to be setting this up and using it to see how well it works and how effective it is and what the pros and cons are. So out of the packaging, there was 3 pieces. You have your edge guide that rolls along the edge of your plywood. You have your measuring piece here that tells you how big of a piece you're cutting. And then you have your plate, which is what your saw attaches to. And this is adjustable, slides up and down. For assembly, all you had to do was slide this on from the end and then attach these 2 screws, and that was it. It was ready to go. There's 3 universal pictures here next to this big exclamation point. There's this one that says you should learn how to read before you use this. This one you should look cool and wear sunglasses, and this one that says you should listen to good music while you work. The measurements go up to 24 inches, so that's the largest you can rip on this piece, which is half a sheet of plywood, which makes perfect sense. And then you can rip the 8-foot length on basically any size. This is the clamping mechanism that sets it once you decide on how wide you need your rip piece to be, and it works pretty well. I'd say it's pretty stable. And these are the 2 pieces that you connect your saw with. Now I have a Makita cordless saw, and right out of the packaging I put this thing in and I bumped it up against this little piece the way it already was. And for me, I really wanted to make sure I got this thing square, because if it's not square, it might not cut straight. The other thing I noticed is that I needed to pull up my little bevel gauge, or whatever you call this thing is, bevel clamp, in order to screw one of those screws in, just to get the clearance for the screwdriver. All right, so let's go ahead and attach my circular saw. Looks like I'm gonna have to move the guard to get it to sit flat on top of there. Dang it. All right, I'll tighten this one down. Move that back down so it's at 0, and then tighten this one down. All right, I assume that's pretty tight. It's not super tight, so you don't want to jerk this thing around and knock it out of square, but there's lines. Ooh, it squeaked. There's lines along here to help you kind of guide to make sure that it's square. And it looks pretty good. All right, so I know you can't see very well, but the next thing I want to do is set my saw depth. So I'm going to move the safety out of the way, and I'm going to dip it down so it's maybe 1/4 of an inch, maybe a little bit less than that, past the material I want to cut. And then I'm going to set it. Now I have it sitting on top of some sacrificial insulation foam. I don't know if you can see that. There it is. And that way I can just cut into it without worrying about messing anything up. There's all kinds of things you could set it on top of. Even stringing some 2x4s along there would work too. The next thing I want to do is set my width of the piece I want to cut. Now I need to cut some 8-inch pieces. So here's 8-inch right here. I really wish that these numbers, they are cut in, but they're not very visible. So that could be an improvement if they could make those darker somehow. I do appreciate that it's cut into the metal so they won't wear off. But I have a red line here that I'm going to line up with my 8-inch, which is really tricky if you can't see it very well. All right, so let's lock that in. We should be good to go. Now on the edge of my board, I want to double check that we're getting an 8-inch cut. So I'm gonna mark 8 inches with my tape measure. I'm gonna use my speed square to mark, nuts. To mark that line. And I'm going to put an X on the outside of it to make sure I want my blade to fall on the outside of that line, on this side, not this side. So let's set the blade up and see how close it is to my line. I don't know how well you can see it, but I got it set there and it appears the blade is sitting right on top of the line. So if I were to cut that, I would hope that it'd be 8 inches, but it might be just a little bit shy, like a 1/16 of an inch or something. So if you're doing this, make sure you do a test cut. If you need it to be really precise, make sure to do a test cut and then measure after the cut, and then you'll know that you're getting that precision that you need. So my project isn't too precise, so I'm gonna go ahead and cut it and I'll measure it to see how close it is to 8 inches. So one of the criticisms I hear about this system is that it might have a tendency to move around if you lose your stability. Now we're holding this edge guide up against the edge, but if we don't have a full sheet of plywood, we might push too hard and it might move and it might twist, and that would be bad. So when you get to less than a full sheet like I have, you can't clamp it down for stability because you won't have the clearance for this guide right here. So you just got to be careful and give even pressure as you go and make sure it doesn't want to meander on you. All right, so let's check the width on various spaces here. I would say this is exactly 8 inches on the end. This is also 8 inches. You see very little variation, if any, as we go along here. It almost seems more narrow by like a 32nd of an inch at the end here. So not perfect, but pretty good. One thing I like about the Rip cut versus that large Bora guide is that with the large 8-foot Bora guide, it has the ability to give just a little bit of flex in the middle. And so if you're pushing a little uneven as you go along, you might end up with a slightly wider midsection and then the whole edge is off. With this edge guide, as long as you start with the factory edge, you're going to keep a pretty much straight edge as you go, as long as you keep it snug against the edge of it. So ultimately, I really like this thing. The biggest plus by far for me is how fast the setup is and how easy it is to get a piece cut. Whereas with some of the other systems that I use, it takes a lot of setup just to get one cut. And if you want to do repeatable cuts, the setup is the same. With this one, once you're set and you want to do repeatable cuts, you can crank them out. Another big plus is how easy it is to get the saw on and off of the plate. For me, it was just popping it in there, putting the 2 screws down. Now with the Bora guide, I got my old circular saw, which is a plug-in corded saw, and I just keep it on this plate because there was a lot of setup involved to get it right. And so I just keep it there and it's basically designated to be used with that. For this, I need my battery saw for all kinds of stuff and projects, and I can't keep it anchored to this thing. I don't want to have to do a lengthy process of getting it on and off. And so this is ideal for that too. The only downside that I can see outside of the potential for it meandering is that you're not going to be able to do anything wider than 24 inches, which is not a problem when you're ripping a piece of plywood lengthwise. But if you wanted to cut it in the other dimension, if you wanted to cut 2 4x4 sections, you're not going to be able to use this to do that. So you're going to have something else on hand for that, whether it be the Bora guide or just a homemade option like this, where you just set it down and you have this design just so you plop it on there and cut a straight line, and that works just fine. But for repeatable 8-foot length cuts, this is definitely the best thing that I've found so far. Anyway, that's going to do it for this review. I hope you found this video helpful. If you did, make sure to like the video and consider subscribing and be an honorary doofus. I always welcome the company. Oh yeah, and don't forget, I will put a link to this product in the description, so make sure you click down there. If you click through those links, you'll really help me out. Even if you don't buy this, just click it and then go about your day. Either way, I appreciate you watching, and as always, don't be afraid to be a doofus.